Evelyn Harper had seen heartbreak in her 72 years, losing her husband to cancer, watching her daughter move 3 states away, but nothing had prepared her for this. A dog, barely alive, its fur matted with blood and thorns, collapsed on her porch one summer evening, as if it had dragged itself there for a reason. And what Evelyn didn't know yet was that this very dog, abandoned and forgotten by the world, would soon do something no human ever could. It would save her life. She saved him when no one else would. And when her time came, he returned the favor. But let's go back. Before the blood, before the ambulance, before the miracle, to the morning that started it all. If you've ever felt alone, if you've ever believed that life was finished giving you surprises, this story is for you. Stay with us, because what happens next just might make you believe in second chances, in fate, and in the kind of bond that only the heart can understand. For Evelyn Harper, mornings felt like worn-out lullabies, soft, slow, and filled with echoes from a life that used to be fuller. Her husband, Joe, had passed away 5 years ago. Her daughter, Rachel, called when she could. But the distance was more than just miles. The house had grown quieter, room by room, until the only heartbeat left was her own. Evelyn's days passed in ritual: tea at 7, garden pruning by 9, a crossword by noon. It wasn't joy exactly, but it was peace. And after all she'd been through, peace felt like enough. That morning, the air smelled of honeysuckle. Her tomatoes were beginning to ripen, and for a brief moment, Evelyn smiled. That's when she heard it. Not a rabbit, not a squirrel. Something heavier, slower, dragging itself. She rose from her chair, hand instinctively resting on the porch rail. At first she saw nothing. Then, a shape, low to the ground, stumbling, collapsing, getting up again. A dog, a large one, golden brown, ribs showing, patches of fur missing, its eyes haunting. Took 3 more steps, then fell, right on her porch. Not a bark, not a whimper, just a final thud, and silence. Her heart raced. She hadn't touched a dog since their old shepherd Max passed 15 years ago, but instinct took over. She grabbed a towel from the kitchen, a bowl of water. Her hands were shaking, but firm. She checked for wounds. There were many. Old scars, new cuts, thorns embedded deep in its paws. It was breathing, barely. She whispered, "Hold on, sweetheart. You didn't come all this way to die." For the next hour, Evelyn became a nurse again. She had cared for her husband in his final months, changing bandages, administering medicine, holding his hand through the worst of it. Now those same hands soothed a dying stranger, one with fur and pain in its eyes, and something else, something she hadn't seen in a long, long time. Trust. She named him Boone. She didn't know why, it just felt right. And Boone? He never left that porch again. The days following Boone's injury were some of the hardest of Evelyn's life. As the storm raged on, Evelyn fought against the bitter cold and relentless winds to carry the injured dog back to her cabin. His breathing was shallow, his body trembling from the shock. Her heart raced as she hurried through the snow, her thoughts frantic. Boone was not just any dog. He had become a symbol of hope, and now, in the midst of a tragedy, she felt the weight of the responsibility she had taken on. She reached the cabin and laid Boone on the makeshift bed she had prepared for him. His chest rose and fell slowly as Evelyn tended to his wounds. Every movement she made was deliberate, every step measured as she cleaned his injuries with a gentle hand. The sight of Boone, so helpless and fragile, tugged at Evelyn's heartstrings. She had always been a woman of resilience, but this was different. The connection she felt with Boone was unspoken but undeniable, and she couldn't help but wonder how much longer he could hold on. As the hours stretched into days, Evelyn refused to leave his side. She spent each moment caring for him, offering him comfort and reassurance with soft words and soothing strokes. She applied bandages with trembling hands, her focus unwavering. There was something about Boone that pulled her in, something deep within him that mirrored her own struggles. Both of them had known pain, loss, and loneliness, Yet here they were, together in this quiet, storm-ravaged cabin, fighting for something greater than survival. They were fighting for each other. The days began to blur into one another. The storm outside finally subsided, leaving behind a blanket of snow that covered the world in an eerie stillness. Inside the cabin, Evelyn worked tirelessly to nurse Boone back to health. Each time she entered the small room where he rested, his eyes would open, locking with hers. Despite the pain he was in, there was a quiet trust in his gaze, a trust he had given her without hesitation, and one she had no intention of breaking. She noticed the subtle changes first. Boone's once shaky steps began to steady, and the pained whimpers that had filled the air during the first few nights were replaced by the soft growl of contentment when Evelyn would sit beside him. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, as if the very act of caring for one another was healing both of their broken spirits. Evelyn knew that Boone was no longer just an injured animal she had found in the storm. He had become a companion, a silent reminder that even in the darkest times, there was the potential for hope. Every day, as the sun rose and set, she felt the presence of Boone in her life more and more, and with that presence came a strength she had long forgotten she had. As the weeks passed, Evelyn began to take Boone on shorter walks outside. She wasn't sure if it was the fresh air, or simply the joy of seeing Boone take each step with more confidence, but she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The once barren landscape around her now felt alive with the energy of the dog beside her. Boone's body had healed, but his spirit, too, had undergone a transformation. He was no longer the trembling, weak animal that had stumbled into her life on that fateful day. He was stronger now, more resilient, and he had learned to trust her in ways Evelyn had never imagined. On one particularly bright afternoon, with the sun high in the sky and the snow glistening like a million diamonds, Evelyn took Boone to the nearby forest. It had become a sort of ritual for them. Their walks were always slow, quiet, and peaceful. The forest was a place of solitude, where Evelyn could let her thoughts wander without the weight of the world pressing down on her. It was here, surrounded by the towering trees and the chirping of birds, that she felt most at ease. Boone was more energetic today, pulling her gently along the snow-covered trail. His eyes were bright, his ears perked up, and there was a renewed spring in his step. Evelyn laughed softly to herself as she watched him, his tail wagging as he explored the world around him. It was moments like these that reminded her of the joy of life, moments where everything felt like it might just be okay. The transition from the quiet forest to the open field was gradual, with Boone leading the way. As they approached the edge of the woods, a distant sound broke through the silence, the faint whine of another dog. Evelyn stopped in her tracks, her heart skipping a beat. Could it be another lost animal? She turned to Boone, who was now focused, his head cocked slightly to one side as he listened intently. Evelyn's curiosity and concern grew. She cautiously approached the sound, and as she pushed through the underbrush, she saw the source. A small, emaciated dog curled up beneath a tree, shivering with cold. It was a pitiful sight, the dog's ribs clearly visible beneath its thin fur, its eyes wide with fear and confusion. Evelyn's heart ached as she knelt down beside it, gently coaxing the animal closer. "It's okay, little one," she whispered softly, her voice laced with empathy. Boone, standing beside her, lowered his head, sniffing the dog with cautious curiosity. His eyes flickered to Evelyn's face, and in that moment, she knew what he was thinking. He understood what it meant to be vulnerable, to be in pain. And now, just as she had helped him, he was there to help another. Evelyn gently scooped the small dog into her arms, feeling its frail body tremble against her chest. Boone followed closely, his presence a silent assurance that this new, fragile animal would be safe. Together, they returned to the cabin, and Evelyn began the process of caring for yet another creature in need. The bond between them all was undeniable: Boone, Evelyn, and this new dog. A bond forged in the fire of hardship and survival. That evening, as Evelyn sat by the fire with Boone curled at her feet, she couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. It was impossible to deny the powerful connection that had formed between her and Boone. But as she looked down at the new dog, she realized that the circle of healing had only just begun. What had started as a rescue had transformed into something more. A family, born out of compassion, trust, and the undeniable power of connection. The days that followed were filled with more walks, more quiet moments, and more healing. Evelyn had not only saved Boone, but in doing so, she had found something far more valuable: herself. The storm that had come to her life had not destroyed her. It had made her stronger, more resilient, and more capable of love than she had ever thought possible. Boone had given her the strength to continue, and together, they would face whatever came next, with the same unwavering bond that had brought them together in the first place. The snow continued to fall, now in a quiet, steady blanket over the landscape. Days had turned to weeks since that fateful night Boone had been brought to Evelyn's cabin. The storm had passed, but the world outside was still frozen in time. Yet inside, the warmth of a newfound connection blossomed with each passing moment. Evelyn's care for Boone had become more than just the nurturing of an injured animal. It had become an unwavering commitment to a soul who needed her as much as she needed him. The days had blurred together. She spent hours beside him, watching as he slowly regained his strength. His body had been battered, his muscles stiff and fragile at first, but now he stood tall. His coat, once ragged and thin, now glossy and thick. His eyes, those sad, worn eyes, had softened too, not just out of physical exhaustion, but out of trust. He had come to rely on her, and it had been in that small but profound shift that Evelyn began to see the true depth of their bond. Every day, he came closer to her, and with each step, her heart swelled a little more. But it wasn't just the healing process that had changed Boone. It was the spirit that had stirred within him. He had once been broken, running from something or perhaps from everything. Now, as he recovered, there was a quiet strength within him, an unspoken promise that he would protect the one who had saved him. It wasn't just Evelyn who noticed this change. The animals that had once avoided the cabin, the birds that kept their distance, now seemed to gather in the woods surrounding her home. The wild was beginning to soften toward her as Boone did. In the evenings, when the sky turned violet and the first stars began to twinkle, she would often look outside to see the shadow of a deer, standing just beyond the tree line, its eyes reflecting the light of the fire inside. Evelyn had been so focused on caring for Boone that she hadn't even realized how much the silence of the wilderness had begun to speak to her, until one day, when she ventured outside to fetch firewood. Boone, now stronger and full of energy, padded beside her, his presence always a quiet comfort. As she knelt to gather the logs, a familiar rustling sound caught her attention. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but as the noise grew louder, her heart skipped. A figure appeared from behind a snow-covered boulder, a small, scruffy dog, ribs visible beneath its thin coat. It was weak, barely able to stand, its eyes wide and panicked as it glanced between Evelyn and Boone. Evelyn's heart broke for the creature, knowing that it had wandered here for help. She stood up slowly, not wanting to frighten it, and reached out a tentative hand. The dog flinched, but didn't move. Boone's eyes locked with Evelyn's, and she understood. The trust they had built, the bond they had formed, was now ready to extend to another. The small dog took a cautious step toward Evelyn, its thin legs shaking with exhaustion. She crouched down, offering warmth and comfort. Gently, she reached out, wrapping her arms around the trembling creature, pulling it close to her chest. "We'll take care of you, too," Evelyn whispered, her voice full of promise. The dog's fragile body relaxed in her arms, its breathing calming as if it had finally found safety. Boone, standing just a few feet away, watched them both carefully. His eyes flicked from Evelyn to the new dog, and there was no jealousy or hesitation, only an understanding. He had seen what was needed. This was a pack in the making, a family born out of survival and love. Evelyn brought the small dog into the cabin, setting it by the fire. She didn't know where it had come from or how long it had been suffering, but the other animal, Boone, seemed to know. He lay beside the dog, keeping a watchful eye on it, his body tense but steady. A quiet strength radiated from him, And for the first time since his injury, Evelyn saw the protector in him emerge. It didn't take long for the new dog, which Evelyn had named Riley, to find his own rhythm. Each day, his strength grew, and with it, a bond that mirrored the one Evelyn had already formed with Boone. Boone and Riley began to coexist peacefully, often seen lying side by the fire, their quiet companionship a symbol of the family Evelyn had unknowingly built. As the days passed, Evelyn saw that Boone's own transformation had become more than just physical healing. He had opened up emotionally, something Evelyn never expected from the skittish, injured dog she had found that first night. His loyalty was clear in every step he took, every look he gave her. And it was during one cold evening, as a fresh layer of snow began to blanket the earth, that Boone proved just how far his loyalty extended. Evelyn had gone outside to check the perimeter of her property, her breath forming clouds in the air as she trudged through the deep snow. Boone, as always, was at her side, never straying too far. But as they reached the edge of the woods, the sound of something large crashing through the trees made her freeze. She turned to see a shadow moving swiftly toward them, its outline unmistakable. A large, threatening wolf, its eyes gleaming with hunger. Fear struck her heart, but before she could react, Boone stood in front of her, his body tense and ready to protect her. He wasn't the injured, fearful dog who had stumbled into her life anymore. He was a warrior, standing firm against whatever danger approached. Evelyn's heart raced as the wolf drew closer, but Boone didn't move. He stayed between her and the approaching animal, growling low, his muscles rippling beneath his coat. The wolf hesitated, its gaze locking onto Boone's, and for a moment, the two animals seemed to size each other up, the wild against the domesticated, each with their own power and instincts. Evelyn held her breath, her hands shaking as she watched Boone, but she knew in that moment, Boone had transformed. He was no longer the broken animal she had rescued. He had become her protector. And the wolf, sensing that the confrontation wasn't worth the fight, turned and retreated back into the shadows of the forest. Boone stood his ground for a moment longer, watching the wolf disappear before he slowly turned back to Evelyn. His eyes were calm, steady, and full of an unspoken message. "I've got you." Evelyn's heart swelled with pride as she knelt down beside him, her hands trembling as she cupped his face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Boone nuzzled her hand, his tail giving a small, contented wag. As they made their way back to the cabin, the quiet of the snow-covered world surrounding them felt different, peaceful, safe, and full of possibility. In that moment, Evelyn knew something that had taken her a long time to understand. It wasn't just that she had saved Boone. In a way, Boone had saved her too. And as she closed the door behind them, the warmth of the cabin enveloping them once again, Evelyn knew that the story of how they had become a family, against all odds, was only just beginning. The clouds that had lingered over the Montana winter began to thin as spring tiptoed in, but Evelyn still carried the storm inside her. Though her home had grown warmer, with Boone's steady breathing curled beside the fireplace, the laughter of children visiting for storytelling afternoons, and the sound of birds returning, it was her heart that struggled to thaw completely. She had begun to live again, yes, but a part of her still kept the world at arm's length. That changed the day she took Boone to visit Henry's grave. She hadn't been there since the funeral. The pain had felt too raw, too dangerous, as if standing there might open a dam she wouldn't be able to close again. But now, with Boone by her side, something in her felt steadier, not healed, but braver. They walked the quiet trail together. Boone stayed close, glancing up at her often, as though sensing the weight of the moment. The path curved through whispering pines, down past the old creek that had once flooded and washed out half the road. A storm she and Henry had braved together years ago. Evelyn could almost hear his voice in the breeze. "We're tougher than this weather, Eve." When they reached the simple wooden cross, Evelyn stood in silence for a long time. Her hands trembled slightly as she knelt and touched the earth. Boone sat next to her, tail still, eyes soft. "I didn't know how to come back here," she whispered. "I thought if I did, I'd fall apart." The wind rustled the trees. But he wouldn't want me to be alone, would he? Boone leaned into her, his head resting gently on her knee. She felt his warmth, steady and sure. No, he wouldn't, she said, her voice thick with tears. And maybe that's why you're here, huh? To help me find my way back. That visit marked something new. Evelyn began to truly open her world again. She hosted tea mornings for the church ladies, even joined a small community book club held in the town library. Boone was always with her, trotting beside her like a guardian, a friend, a memory in motion. But as she reached out again, the world, so long forgotten, reached back with all its unpredictability. It was early April when the call came from her neighbor, Tom, who ran the old sawmill just down the valley. His voice was rushed, nervous. "Evelyn, you still take those trails near Devil's Ridge?" "I do," she said slowly. "Why?" "Don't go up there today. Or the next few days, really. We spotted a large black bear roaming close to the southern bend. She's aggressive, might have cubs nearby." Evelyn thanked him and promised she'd steer clear. But old habits die hard. A week later, she forgot all about the warning. She wasn't even planning to go far, just to the little outcrop where wild violets had started to bloom, the ones Henry used to gather for her in an old mason jar. The trail was familiar, safe. She had walked it hundreds of times, even in snowstorms. Boone came along, his steps light, nose twitching with excitement at spring's return. The forest was unusually quiet that morning. No birdsong, no wind, just the crunch of leaves beneath her boots and Boone's soft huffs as he sniffed ahead. Then everything happened at once. A low, guttural growl shattered the silence. Boone froze, hackles raised. Evelyn turned, and her breath caught in her throat. A massive black bear stood just 20 yards away, half hidden in the brush, but unmistakable. Her eyes locked onto Evelyn's. Evelyn didn't scream. She couldn't. Her body was frozen, a primal fear anchoring her in place. The bear stepped forward. Boone moved without hesitation. He darted between Evelyn and the bear, barking, a low, furious snarl that echoed through the trees. He didn't lunge, didn't chase. He stood his ground, every muscle in his body coiled with courage. "Boone, no!" Evelyn cried, but her voice was barely a whisper against the roaring in her ears. The bear huffed loudly, stomped a paw, and then, mercifully, turned and lumbered away, vanishing into the thicket as quickly as she had appeared. Boone stood still, panting heavily, watching the woods. Evelyn dropped to her knees and clutched him, her face buried in his fur. You saved me," she choked, shaking. Boone whined softly and licked her cheek. Later, back home, Evelyn couldn't stop replaying the moment in her mind. It wasn't just that Boone had protected her. It was how he had done it. Not recklessly, not wildly, but with instinct, focus, and resolve. It was as if, in that one split second, he'd made a decision. I will protect her, no matter the cost. And in that moment, Evelyn realized something else. Boone wasn't just an animal she had saved from the roadside that cold winter night. He was her companion, her mirror, the living proof that broken things, hearts, bodies, lives, could be mended. That loss didn't mean the end. Sometimes it was the beginning of something different, something just as meaningful. She sat on her porch that evening, Boone curled beside her, the sky painted with soft orange and lavender hues. "I think," she whispered, "that Henry would have liked you, Boone." Boone raised his head slightly, then rested it back on her foot. "I know I do." Evelyn stirred at the sound of the wind whispering against the cabin walls. The Montana dawn was still a few hours away, yet the light snowflakes had already begun dancing outside, swirling like fragile memories caught between yesterday and tomorrow. She sat by the fireplace, her knitting abandoned in her lap, eyes tracing the flickering flame. Boone lay curled at her feet, his once shaky frame now grown strong and noble. The storm had passed 2 nights ago, but something had settled in the air. A tension, soft but certain, like the moment before a photograph is taken, or before a heart breaks. The letter sat unopened on the table. It had come from the county office. Plain envelope, no return address, but Evelyn knew it bore news she wasn't ready to face. Her name on the front, hand-typed, not handwritten, which meant business, not warmth. But Boone had sensed it before she did. That morning, when the letter arrived, Boone wouldn't leave her side. He whimpered softly, placing his head on her lap, his amber eyes studying hers, almost asking, "Are you ready?" She hadn't been. Not yet. Now, 2 days later, she still wasn't. Evelyn reached for the envelope. Her fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of decisions she thought she'd buried long ago. Boone lifted his head, watching her closely. She slowly tore the seal. The paper inside was crisp, clinical. Her breath caught as she read. The land was under review. A private developer had petitioned to purchase it, claiming she hadn't met the updated residency clause passed quietly during the pandemic. The same clause that could revoke ownership if she left the property for more than 180 days in a calendar year. She had left for exactly 187 days when her sister fell ill in Oregon last spring. Evelyn blinked, heart hammering. This was her home. This was the land Harold had fenced with his own hands. This was where Boone had found her. This wasn't just dirt and pine and snow. This was her heartbeat. And now, they were threatening to take it. Boone stood abruptly, his ears perked toward the window, his posture sharp. A low growl vibrated from his chest. Evelyn turned quickly, startled. She followed his gaze and saw it. Headlights, 2 of them, in the distance, bouncing slowly up the icy trail, cutting through the trees. No one ever came up here at this hour. Not unless it was trouble. Evelyn stood, her breath catching. "Boone," she whispered. "Stay close." He didn't need to be told. He moved like a shadow at her side. The Boone stopped 100 feet away. Doors opened. 2 figures stepped out, one tall, one stout, their silhouettes unfamiliar. One of them had a clipboard. The land surveyors. It was starting. They were doing the inspection already, before she even had a chance to respond. "Mrs. Raines?" one called out. "We're with the county. Just need a moment of your time." Evelyn opened the door but didn't step out. "I haven't agreed to anything," she called back, voice firm. Boone stood behind her, his eyes glowing in the porch light. The men didn't move closer, but their tone held no sympathy. "This is standard. Just need to verify the property lines and—" Boone's growl cut through the air. A low, steady warning. The man stopped mid-sentence. "You should leash your dog," the tall one said flatly. "For your own safety." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "For mine? Or yours?" A tense silence followed. They turned, moved back toward their truck. "We'll be back with the sheriff next time," one muttered. "You've got 30 days to vacate if the ruling holds." And just like that, they were gone. Later that night, Evelyn sat with Boone, her hand resting on his fur. "I don't have much fight left," she whispered. "But I have you. And maybe that's enough." Boone pressed into her side, as if saying, "You saved me. Now it's my turn." The next morning, something unexpected happened. Boone disappeared. He had never gone off without her. Not once since the day she pulled him from the snow. She searched the ridge, the grove, even down by the creek. But no paw prints. Only snow and silence. Her heart began to ache in that quiet, old familiar ache. The one she hadn't felt since Harold. Then, just before dusk, Boone came back. But he wasn't alone. A young man followed, breathless, wearing a ruffled badge on his vest. "Ma'am," he called out. "I'm sorry to bother you, but this dog, he ran into our outpost an hour ago, grabbed my glove and wouldn't let go until I followed him. Led me 10 miles through the woods." Evelyn stared, stunned. The man continued. "He brought me straight here. I'm with wildlife enforcement. I work land use mediation. Something about that dog. He didn't give me a choice." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. Boone looked up at her, tail wagging once. Inside the cabin, Evelyn poured the man tea, explained the situation. As he read the letter, his expression shifted. "I've seen this before," he muttered. "Loopholes and land grabs. But if what you're saying is true, you have a case. Especially if we can prove this is a heritage homestead." You say your husband built this fence line? She nodded. Every inch of it. 40 years ago. I'll help, the officer said. And I'll do it pro bono. But I have to ask, how did your dog know to find me? Evelyn looked at Boone, who now lay calmly by the fire. I don't know, she said softly. But Boone always seems to know when I'm falling. And he catches me. Every time. The days that followed the storm were quieter than usual. Boone stayed closer than ever, even after the vet gave him a cautious green light. His leg still bore a faint limp, but there was a light in his eyes now, like he had found not only a home but a purpose. Evelyn noticed it most in the mornings, when the sky over Montana was blushing with color and he'd sit beside her rocking chair, breathing in the stillness like he belonged to it all. But even in the calm, Evelyn felt it. A shift, a tightening in her chest she couldn't name. Not quite fear, but a tension that never fully left her bones. Something had changed after that storm. Not just the landscape, not just the barn, but something deeper. Inside her. Inside Boone. And then came the knock. It was early evening when it echoed through the house. A slow, deliberate knock, not the casual rap of a neighbor. Boone growled low, his ears alert, and Evelyn felt her body freeze as if the walls themselves had braced for something. She opened the door with care, her fingers trembling on the handle. A man stood on the porch, tall, with a military bearing, graying at the temples, but sharp-eyed. He wore a dark jacket and a badge that glinted faintly under the porch light. "Mrs. Evelyn Hart?" he asked, voice level. She nodded. "Yes. Can I help you?" He hesitated before speaking again. "I'm Agent Connolly, Department of Homeland Security. May I come in? This concerns your late husband." Her breath caught. "Harold." She stepped back slowly, gesturing him in. Boone didn't move from his place near the door, eyes locked on the man like a sentinel. Inside, the agent sat stiffly, his fingers steepled, eyes scanning the modest cabin like it held answers. Evelyn sat across from him, heart hammering in her chest. "I understand your husband was a communications engineer during his service," Connolly began. "Yes," she replied quietly. "And after that, he worked with the Forest Service." "What is this about?" He drew a small folder from his coat. "We believe your husband may have been in possession of classified materials. Things he kept hidden, even from you." The world spun for a moment. She laughed. An incredulous, disbelieving sound. "That's not possible." Harold was honest. Loyal. He served his country until his last breath. The agent looked at her gently, but there was weight behind his words. "Sometimes the people we love keep secrets to protect us." Boone suddenly barked, a sharp warning, and Evelyn flinched. The agent turned, startled, but the dog didn't lunge, just stood his ground, hackles raised. "He doesn't like tension," she explained, voice trembling. "He's protective." Connolly gave a respectful nod. "It's clear he loves you." Evelyn swallowed. "What do you want from me?" "We need to search the property." The words hit her like ice water. Search? Her home? Harold's things? "I have nothing to hide," she whispered. "But if you think there's danger in something Harold left behind, I want to know." Connolly nodded. "We'll be discreet. It's probably nothing. But sometimes, old ghosts have long shadows." That night, Evelyn lay awake listening to the wind against the windows. She ran her fingers over the old locket Harold had given her the night before he died. An odd little thing, slightly heavier than most. She'd never thought much of it until now. At dawn, the agents returned. They searched the workshop, the garage, even the barn now rebuilt from the storm. They moved carefully, respectfully, but they were looking for something specific. Something they wouldn't name. Boone stayed glued to her side the entire time, never barking, just watching. Then, in the attic, under a loose floorboard, they found it. A sealed metal case. Inside, a coded notebook, an old military radio module, and a series of tapes labeled only with dates. The lead agent, Connolly, opened one and listened. His face darkened. Evelyn sat down slowly, her knees weak. "What is it?" she asked. Connolly hesitated before answering. I think your husband may have intercepted something years ago. A signal. A transmission we thought was lost. And he never told anyone. But why? She whispered. Because some things are too dangerous, he said. Or too powerful. The words made her stomach twist. I want it all back, she said firmly. When you're done with it. I don't want his life erased because of fear. Connolly met her eyes. I'll do what I can. That night, Evelyn stood on the porch, watching the stars flicker through the clouds. Boone lay at her feet, breathing deep. I don't know what you got us into, Harold, she said to the sky. But I miss you, and I hope, whatever you were trying to protect, it was worth it. Just then, Boone growled low again. From the tree line, a flash of movement. Then another. Not animals. Men. Evelyn felt her blood run cold. She stepped back into the house, heart pounding, locking the door. Boone stood now, alert, tail stiff. A voice outside called softly, Mrs. Hart, we just want to talk. It wasn't Connolly. She moved to the phone, but the line was dead. Boone sensed it first, a danger deeper than before. He turned, raced to the back door, and with a look, nudged her gently, guiding her to the hidden hatch Harold had built years ago, under the floorboards in the pantry. They crawled inside, darkness wrapping around them, heartbeats thundering in their ears. Outside, boots crunched the gravel. The front door splintered open. Evelyn clutched Boone close. He didn't move, didn't tremble, just waited. For a moment, time held its breath. Then a muffled shout, a scuffle, and silence. When she emerged, the cabin was wrecked, but empty. Connolly's voice came from the porch. They weren't ours, but we got here just in time. He looked down at Boone, admiration in his eyes. I think your dog saved your life. Evelyn sank to her knees, wrapping her arms around Boone. You're more than just a rescue, she whispered into his fur. You were meant to find me, just like I was meant to find you. And in the quiet that followed, Boone licked her cheek, tail wagging gently, and Evelyn finally allowed herself to cry, not just for fear, but for the love she had found again, in a world that still held danger and hope. The snow had begun to fall again, thick and soft like sifted flour from heaven's hands. Montana's winter did not relent easily. It blanketed the wilderness in silence and mystery. Evelyn's cabin, nestled under ancient pines, stood as a lone witness to the unspoken trials of that season. And Boone, her fiercely loyal companion, never strayed far from her side. Ever since Evelyn's accident, where she had slipped by the creek and fractured her ankle, Boone had assumed a role far greater than that of a rescued dog. He had become her sentinel, her silent partner in every moment of pain and healing. Even now, as Evelyn hobbled with a cane, Boone watched her every move. His eyes never left her as she gathered firewood slowly near the porch. Each crunch of snow beneath her boot was mirrored by Boone's padded steps beside her. The day had started like any other, quiet, gray, and cold. Evelyn brewed coffee while Boone lay curled on the rug, his ears occasionally twitching at the distant calls of unseen birds. The radio whispered old country songs that Evelyn barely heard, her thoughts always drifting to the months that had changed her life. She often caught herself staring at Boone, remembering that broken creature lying in the rain, the way he had looked at her then, and the way he had come for her, sprinting through the snow to summon help when she had screamed for mercy beneath that fallen tree limb. It wasn't just gratitude she felt. It was a connection deeper than memory, older than instinct. Boone wasn't a pet. He was part of her spirit now. As she stood on the porch sipping coffee, a sound fractured the morning calm, a low growl. Boone had risen to his feet, every muscle in his frame taut, ears pinned forward. Boone, Evelyn called gently. He didn't move. She followed his gaze toward the treeline, where the shadows seemed darker than usual. Boone let out a warning bark, not frantic, but full of purpose. That's when Evelyn saw it. The figure. No two. First she thought it was just a deer, but then the taller one stepped out, wearing a heavy coat and a hood, face obscured. They weren't walking like hikers. There was a strange hesitation in their movement, a slowness. Boone was already off the porch. "Boone!" Evelyn cried out. But he was gone, racing across the snow like a shot. The people, or whatever they were, froze as Boone approached. One lifted a hand. Evelyn grabbed her old field binoculars and focused. Her heart thudded. Guns. They were carrying rifles. "Boone, come back!" she screamed. But Boone didn't stop. He circled them, barking fiercely. The figures seemed startled, unsure whether to raise their weapons or retreat. Evelyn ducked inside and grabbed her radio. The ranger station. She could barely get a signal out this far, but she had to try. "Ranger station, this is Evelyn Carter up near Black Pine Ridge. I've got 2 armed strangers near my cabin. Please respond." Static. Again. Then finally, "Copy that, Evelyn. We're dispatching a team. ETA 25 minutes. Stay inside." She dropped the radio and ran to the window. Boone was still out there, hurting them, protecting her. But then, a shot rang out. The world froze. "Boone!" The echo of the gunfire bounced off the valley walls. One of the figures had fired a warning shot into the air. Boone had backed off but didn't run. He stood his ground, growling low. Then came voices. Angry. Male. "Crazy mutt. Get lost." They turned and began to move off, disappearing slowly into the trees. Boone didn't chase them. He waited until they were gone. Only then did he return, limping slightly. Evelyn met him at the porch steps and collapsed to her knees, arms around his thick neck. Her tears soaked into his fur. "You brave boy," she whispered, over and over. "My Boone, you saved me again." The rangers arrived minutes later. Tracks were followed, warnings issued. But the strangers were never found. Boone's wound was minor, just a scratch. But Evelyn treated it like a sacred duty. They sat together by the fire that night, the storm outside raging again. But inside, there was warmth. In the flames, Evelyn saw a truth she hadn't spoken aloud before. Boone wasn't just her protector. He was her family, and she would never let him down. The sun broke over the horizon like a soft promise, bathing the frozen Montana landscape in muted gold. Snow still clung to the shadows, but the air hinted at change, like the breath of spring trying to push through winter's stubborn grip. Evelyn stood on her porch, one hand wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, the other gently resting on Boone's head. He sat at her feet, his ears flicking at the distant sounds of the woods, alert but calm. Ever since the accident, he hadn't strayed far from her side. Boone had become her shadow, sleeping at the foot of her bed, walking beside her on the old logging road, and pausing with that uncanny sense of timing whenever Evelyn felt her energy dip. He didn't bark much. He didn't have to. His eyes said enough. And yet, Evelyn couldn't shake a strange feeling that had settled over her in the past few days. Like something was off. Not wrong necessarily, just waiting. As if the mountains around her were holding their breath. Forest Ranger Daniels had visited 2 days prior, bringing canned goods and a thick envelope of maps and fire warnings. He'd stayed longer than usual, sipping hot cider while talking about landslides and melting snowpacks. Evelyn had nodded, thanked him, and smiled when appropriate, but her eyes kept drifting to Boone. He was pacing that afternoon, not nervous, calculated, as if he sensed something just beyond the tree line. She hadn't told Daniels about the footprints she'd seen down by the old trail. Human, fresh, too far off the hiking path, and too close to her cabin. She didn't want to sound paranoid. This was Montana. People roamed. Hunters, hikers, folks who respected the wild and knew better than to intrude. But these prints had felt different, hurried, wandering without purpose. Boone had stood over them, stiff, nose twitching like a sensor wired to some invisible signal. And when she'd said his name, softly, he hadn't moved. That scared her more than anything else. Later that night, as Evelyn stirred a pot of venison stew, the wind howled low against the windows. Boone was already at the door, his body tense, tail lowered but rigid. He let out a single bark, sharp and short. Evelyn froze. Her hand tightened around the wooden spoon. "Is someone there?" she whispered, as if the dog could answer in words. He moved forward, sniffing the crack between the door and frame, his paws silent against the wooden floor. Then another bark. Two this time. He turned to look at her, then back at the door. Evelyn's heartbeat thudded in her ears. She put down the spoon, wiped her hands on a towel, and slowly reached for the hunting rifle that leaned against the wall behind the stove. It hadn't been fired in years, but she kept it clean. The air was electric, tense with unspoken memory. Boone didn't growl, but his body language screamed of unease. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps on the wooden door. Not a ranger's knock. Not the friendly rhythm of Daniel's or the neighbor from down the road. This was something else. Evelyn stepped forward, rifle in hand, her voice steady though her heart raced. "Who is it?" No reply. She looked at Boone. He was crouched now, eyes locked on the door like a soldier. Something was wrong. She reached for the doorknob, hesitating just long enough for Boone to move in front of her. His body blocked the threshold. She gently nudged him aside and opened the door. Just a crack. Nothing. Just the night, wrapped in thick fog and silence. No footprints on the porch. No shadows. Just trees and moonlight. But Boone darted past her, leaping off the porch and into the darkness. "Boone!" she called, her voice cracking. She didn't want to follow, but something about Boone's urgency. She knew she had to. She grabbed her coat, threw it over her shoulders, and stepped outside, cradling the rifle awkwardly. The cold air slapped her face, waking something primal inside her. Something alert, sharpened by years of survival. The woods swallowed her quickly. The path Boone took was not one she'd ever used. He ran as if led by something unseen, instinct, memory, maybe even fear. After 10 minutes of near silence, she finally heard it. A whimper, then a bark. Urgent, not panicked. She followed the sound, ducking beneath broken branches until she reached a clearing. And there, at the base of an old pine, was Boone, standing guard beside something small and shivering. A child, no more than 10, dressed in a threadbare coat, cheeks blue from cold, eyes wide and silent. Evelyn's breath hitched. She dropped to her knees, setting the rifle down and pulling off her coat. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." The girl didn't speak, just stared at Boone, who pressed his head gently to her shoulder. They returned to the cabin slowly, Evelyn carrying the girl, Boone walking in a perfect half-circle around them like a guardian. She lit the fire, brewed sweet tea, wrapped the child in blankets, and checked for injuries. No ID, no backpack, just bruises on her wrists and fear in her eyes. Evelyn didn't press. She just stayed nearby, occasionally reaching for Boone, who never left the girl's side. That night, long after the girl had fallen asleep on the couch, Boone crept to Evelyn's chair and laid his head in her lap. She stroked his ears, her voice barely above a whisper. "You knew. You always do." His tail thumped once, softly. By morning, the girl finally spoke. "My name is Lucy," she said, voice raw. "I ran." Evelyn leaned in. "From who, honey?" Lucy looked at Boone, then at the window. "He was bad. He hurt my mom. I waited until he passed out. Then I ran. I think he followed me." Boone growled low in his throat. Evelyn's blood turned cold. She reached for the old radio on the shelf and called Daniel's. As she waited, she glanced out the window and froze. Tire tracks. Fresh ones. Not Daniel's. Someone else. Evelyn stood frozen in the doorway of the barn, Boone's tag dangling from the tiny hand of the pale, wide-eyed boy who lay crumpled in the hay. The weight of what she was seeing hadn't yet fully settled in her chest, but something about the boy's presence felt like a stone thrown into still water, ripples spreading outward, disrupting everything. Boone lowered his head and sniffed the boy gently, his massive body unusually still. He gave a soft whine and nudged the child's arm with his snout. The boy didn't move. "He's breathing," Evelyn murmured, rushing forward. Her heart thudded painfully as she dropped to her knees beside the boy. His skin was cold, cheeks smudged with dirt and faint scratches, lips tinged slightly blue. She gently turned him onto his back, revealing bruises on his ribs and a bleeding gash on his forehead. Her fingers shook as she reached for her phone and dialed emergency services. A child, maybe 6 or 7, found unconscious in my barn. Head wound, cold skin. Please hurry. Boone stayed beside the boy, tail twitching nervously. His eyes kept scanning the darkness beyond the barn door, ears perked as if still hearing something Evelyn could not. Inside the house, Evelyn wrapped the boy in a thick quilt while they waited for help. Boone never left his side. He lay beside the couch like a guardian, his warm breath fogging the boy's chilled skin. When the paramedics arrived, Evelyn tried to explain everything, but the pieces didn't yet make a full puzzle. I found him in my barn. He had this. She handed over Boone's old collar tag. That belongs to my dog. I lost that tag 2 years ago. I thought it had fallen into the creek. The paramedic gave her a puzzled glance. You think he came here just to return this? I don't know what to think. The boy was whisked away in an ambulance, unconscious but stable. Evelyn stood at the end of her driveway, Boone pressed against her leg, watching the flashing lights fade into the horizon. Snow had begun to fall again, softly at first, but the kind of snow that hinted another storm was building. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She sat by the fireplace, Boone curled at her feet, 1,000 questions clawing at her mind. Who was the boy? How had he gotten here? And more troubling, how had he found Boone's tag? She retrieved her old memory box from the hallway closet. Inside were photos, news clippings, and remnants of a life that felt distant. Among them was a photo of her late husband, Tom, in his ranger uniform with Boone as a pup sitting beside him. Another picture showed the 3 of them by the creek. Her fingers stopped on a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. Rescue at Bitter Ridge, ranger and canine partner save family from icy creek. She remembered that day. Boone had pulled a trapped child from the ice. The family had never been identified publicly, and the mother refused interviews. Evelyn had always found that odd. Could it be? The next morning, Evelyn visited the hospital. Boone wasn't allowed inside, so he stayed in the truck, his eyes never leaving the entrance. The nurse at the front desk gave her a concerned glance. You're the one who found him? Yes. How is he? Awake, but he won't speak. Won't eat either. Seems scared. Trauma-induced mutism, maybe, but he wrote something. He asked for the dog. Evelyn's breath caught. Boone? He wants to see Boone. I'm not supposed to allow it, but maybe just for a moment. Minutes later, Boone padded softly into the sterile hospital room. The boy, pale and tiny against the hospital sheets, sat up the moment he saw him. His face lit up with something resembling relief. Boone approached gently, resting his chin on the boy's lap. The child placed one hand on his head, then another. Tears rolled down his cheeks. Still silent, Evelyn stood in the doorway watching. A nurse whispered, "That dog means something to him. He kept the tag like a treasure." Boone licked the boy's hand once and let out a low, comforting huff. Then the boy spoke. Just one word. Safe. It hit Evelyn like thunder rolling through an empty canyon. That one word unraveled the knot in her chest. She stepped closer. Do you know Boone? From before. The boy looked at her, uncertain, then nodded slowly. He whispered something else. Evelyn had to kneel to hear. He pulled me from the water, the ice. Mama said to never forget. Said he had an angel's eyes. Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes. Her memory raced back to that icy day. The blurred faces. The woman who'd cried but left without a trace. That was you, she murmured. You were the little boy. Over the next few days, Evelyn learned more. The boy's name was Liam. His mother had died a year ago, and he had no known relatives. He'd run from a foster home 2 towns over. No one knew how he'd made it to Evelyn's ranch, miles from any main road. I followed the dog, he told her one morning, sitting by the fireplace wrapped in a knit sweater too big for his frame. What dog? Boone. In my dream, every night, he ran into the snow and I followed. Then I woke up outside. I kept walking. I thought I was dreaming still. Evelyn looked at Boone, who lay nearby, one ear tilted toward them. You found your way to the only soul who would understand, she whispered. The snow outside deepened. Evelyn's ranch, once quiet and solitary, was now filled with gentle laughter, soft footsteps, and the flicker of new life. She was no stranger to sorrow, but something about this boy, about the way Boone watched over him, stirred something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. And in the stillness of Montana winter, a strange peace began to grow. But Evelyn knew this wasn't the end. Something still loomed beyond the tree line. Boone knew it too. His eyes lingered too long on the dark horizon, ears twitching at night. And one morning, Evelyn found strange tracks near the barn, boot prints where there should be none. Evelyn stood frozen in the doorway, staring down at the damp boot prints leading away from her barn. A chill, one that had nothing to do with the autumn air, ran down her spine. Boone let out a low growl beside her, fur prickling along his shoulders. His body was tense, his gaze scanning the dark line of trees just beyond the fence. Liam came up behind them, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "What is it?" he asked, still groggy. She pointed without speaking. His eyes followed the trail of prints disappearing toward the woods. Someone had been watching them. Too close, too silently. Evelyn didn't say anything at first, but her mind was racing. Was it just a lost traveler? A hunter who got turned around? But why would they leave without a word? And why stand so close to the barn? She ushered Liam back into the house and locked the doors behind them. Boone stayed outside, patrolling the yard with deliberate steps, his nose twitching at the air. That night, Evelyn barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the wind against the eaves made her heart lurch. She lay in bed with the rifle propped nearby, the same one Harold had taught her to shoot decades ago. At dawn, she brewed coffee with shaking hands and stepped outside. Boone was there, sitting vigilantly by the barn, eyes fixed on the treeline. When he saw her, his ears twitched, and he stood up, nudging her hand softly before returning his gaze to the woods. The prints were gone now, washed away by the overnight frost. But the feeling wasn't. Boone stayed closer than usual all morning. When Evelyn hung laundry on the back line, he stood guard. When she fed the chickens, he circled them as if expecting danger to pounce from the trees. Liam helped her with chores, sensing her unease even if she didn't speak of it. That night, he asked her directly, "Grandma, do you think someone's trying to steal Boone?" The thought made her blood run cold. She hadn't wanted to consider it, but Boone was no ordinary dog. He was smart, unusually alert, deeply bonded to them. And now that he had saved her life and stuck by them through so much, he was more than just a dog. He was family. "I don't know," she admitted softly, "but I won't let anyone take him." She began double-locking the barn at night. She boarded up the lower windows, checked the back fences more thoroughly than she had in years. Still, the feeling of being watched didn't leave her. One evening, while Liam was inside reading and Boone was curled up by the porch, Evelyn sat alone on the old wooden swing Harold had built. The wind moved through the trees like a whispered warning. The stars blinked cold above her. A rustling came from the forest edge. Boone was on his feet instantly. Evelyn rose, her heart thudding. From the trees, a figure emerged, tall, wrapped in dark clothing, moving slowly, not like someone trying to hide, but like someone who wanted to be noticed now. Boone growled low, stepping in front of Evelyn protectively. The figure stopped a good 20 feet away, hands visible. "I mean no harm," the man said. Evelyn squinted. The voice was raspy, but not threatening. Still, she didn't move. "You've got a dog," he added. "One that saved your life a few weeks ago." Her breath caught. "How do you know that?" "I saw it," he said. "Watched from the tree line. I was living rough out there. Didn't know where else to go." Evelyn didn't lower her guard. Boone stood bristling, not moving an inch. "I just wanted to see if he was real," the man continued. "A dog that smart, that loyal. I never seen anything like it. Evelyn finally spoke. You followed us? No, he said quickly. I just stayed close. I never meant harm. I had a dog once. Lost him a long time ago. When I saw yours, I guess I couldn't stay away. There was something in his voice. A fracture. A memory wrapped in grief. Evelyn nodded slowly. What's your name? He hesitated. Tom. Tom Blake. You hungry, Tom? He blinked. Ma'am. She motioned to the porch. We've got soup, but if you lie to me again, I'll know. And I won't be as kind. Tom looked stunned, then nodded, cautiously stepping forward. Boone let out a short huff, but didn't block his path. Inside, Liam stared wide-eyed as Evelyn calmly explained who Tom was. She let him wash up, gave him a place by the fire, and a hot bowl of soup. That night, after Liam had gone to bed, Evelyn sat across from the man who had been a shadow on the edge of their lives. Tom told her about his years living off-grid after losing everything. His job, his family, and finally his dog, Briscoe. That loss had unmoored him. He wandered, never staying anywhere long. Then one night, weeks ago, he'd seen a woman and a boy rescuing a bleeding dog from the river. He'd followed at a distance, unable to walk away from the sight. He watched them nurse the dog back to life, watched how the dog bonded with them. It reminded him of the connection he'd once had. I didn't know I needed to see that, he said, voice cracking. That kind of love. That kind of loyalty. Evelyn studied him. A broken man who had seen a glimpse of what healing looked like. She didn't trust him yet, but she saw something flickering in him. Something Boone must have sensed, too. The next morning, Tom helped fix the back fence. Quietly, efficiently, Boone watched but didn't interfere. Liam started asking questions about life in the forest. Evelyn stood back and observed. Maybe, just maybe, people like dogs could find their way back from the wild, too. The sky over Montana was awash in soft oranges and deep blues as the sun dipped below the mountain ridge. The air had grown crisp, carrying with it the sense of pine and distant snow. Evelyn stood outside the cabin, her arms crossed, watching Boone from the porch. He had taken up his usual post by the trailhead, ears perked, body alert. Tom Blake was still inside, sipping coffee in silence. The man, though clearly burdened with sorrow and years of isolation, had proven himself genuine. Evelyn had sensed it. The way his voice trembled when he spoke of his old dog Briscoe, the way his eyes softened when Boone approached. There was pain in him, yes, but also the spark of someone who'd once loved deeply. That night, around the fire, Tom shared more. His story wasn't one of crime or malice. It was of loss. A fire had taken his home years ago, and with it, everything he knew. No insurance, no family, just Briscoe, his old hound, who had vanished days later, never to return. I reckon Boone reminded me of him, Tom said quietly, running a rough hand over his face. Same look in the eyes, same soul almost. Evelyn listened, Boone lying between them. She didn't interrupt. Her own journey had been riddled with silence and heartbreak, and she knew the power of simply being heard. The next morning, Evelyn awoke early to the sound of Boone's low growl. She rushed to the porch. Boone stood like a statue, eyes fixed toward the forest. Evelyn followed his gaze and saw movement. Quick, sharp. A figure darted between the trees. Boone took off. Boone! Wait! But the dog didn't stop. Evelyn grabbed her coat and followed, Tom close behind. The morning was icy, their breath visible in the air as they rushed through the woods. They found Boone minutes later, standing over something or someone. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, lay huddled near the base of a tree. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue, and she clutched a torn sleeping bag around her frail body. Boone was gently licking her hand. Evelyn dropped to her knees. Hey, you're okay now. We're here. Tom knelt beside her, already checking for a pulse. Weak but there. She's hypothermic. They carried the girl back to the cabin. Evelyn's arms wrapped around her like a blanket. They warmed her slowly, layers of clothes, heated stones wrapped in cloth, and Boone curled beside her, his body heat offering the purest kind of rescue. Hours passed before the girl finally opened her eyes. "I saw the dog," she whispered. "He came to me. He wouldn't leave. I think he saved me." Evelyn's throat tightened. Boone had always had a sense for need, for sorrow. But this was something more. Her name was Lila. She had been hitchhiking her way across states, running from something she wouldn't yet speak about. But Evelyn didn't press. They gave her time, food, and space. And Boone never left her side. That evening, Lila sat by the fire, cheeks flushed with color, and asked softly, "Can I stay a while? Just until I figure things out." Evelyn looked at her, at Tom, and then at Boone. Boone wagged his tail and laid his head in Lila's lap. "You already belong," Evelyn said. The small cabin, once a place of quiet mourning, now held the weight of shared healing. The first snow came early that year. It blanketed the Montana land in quiet, soft white. The hills that once echoed with Boone's barking, Evelyn's humming, and Tom's hammering now held their breath, as if nature itself was honoring the close of a long, extraordinary chapter. Evelyn stood on the porch, her flannel jacket tugged tight around her shoulders, a steaming mug of tea warming her hands. Boone lay curled at her feet, his graying muzzle twitching slightly as he dreamt. Nearby, Lila, the little pup they'd saved just weeks ago, pounced and rolled in the snow, chasing after invisible things only a young soul could see. Inside, Tom was cooking breakfast. The smell of bacon and sourdough reached the porch, blending with the scent of pine and frost. Evelyn smiled. It was the first morning in a long time that felt still. Not empty, not waiting for something to break or someone to leave, but full. Full in the way only peace can be when it's been earned. The weeks following the fire had been busy, chaotic even. Rebuilding what was lost, salvaging what could be saved, and helping neighbors who'd suffered even more. Boone had been restless at first, as if the memories of that night still buzzed under his skin. But every time Evelyn sat beside him, touched the scar that now marked his flank, he calmed. The pain, like hers, was quieter now, less of a wound, more of a story. Tom stayed. He never made a grand announcement or asked for permission. He just stayed, fixed the gate, repaired the barn door, took the night shifts watching over Boone when Evelyn couldn't keep her eyes open anymore. And in his quiet staying, something old and cracked inside Evelyn began to heal. One evening, she found him kneeling beside the fireplace, holding something wrapped in an old towel. It was a wooden box. Inside was a small metal collar tag, dull with age. "I found it when I was helping clear the old trail near the river," he said. "Figured it might be Boone's. Or maybe it belonged to that old shepherd you had before." Evelyn didn't speak. She just reached out, held the box to her chest, and let the tears fall. Some things didn't need words. Not anymore. It was Lila, in the end, who pulled them all forward. The little pup with oversized ears and a fierce bark had no memory of fire or grief. She bounded through the snow like she was rewriting the world with every step. Boone tolerated her at first. Then, slowly, he began to teach her how to stalk quietly, how to listen for danger, how to trust a human hand. And Evelyn, watching them, realized something. The story wasn't ending. It was becoming something new. On Christmas morning, the three of them hiked to the ridge where Boone had once collapsed all those months ago. Evelyn carried a small bundle wrapped in a red plaid scarf. Inside was a photo of her late husband, a few wildflowers, and Boone's first collar, chewed and stained, but still whole. They buried it under the old pine. Not because they needed to forget, but because they needed to remember, with peace, not pain. That night, the cabin was filled with warmth and laughter. Tom strummed a guitar he'd found at a garage sale. Boone lay near the fire, his tail thumping every time Lila tripped over herself trying to climb into Evelyn's lap. Evelyn looked around the room. The flickering firelight, the Christmas stockings, the small makeshift tree with popcorn garlands, and felt it again. Not grief, not survival. "Grace, I don't know how we made it through," she whispered, more to herself than anyone. Tom looked up from his guitar. Maybe we didn't make it through, he said softly. Maybe we became something else along the way. She nodded. Yes, that felt right. Months later, in spring, Evelyn started volunteering at the local rescue shelter. Lila, now a spunky teenager of a dog, came with her every time. They visited nursing homes, walked veterans with PTSD, and gave talks at schools. Boone came too when he could. Older now, slower, but still steady. Still a protector. Everywhere they went, people asked about the scar on his side. About the pup by his side. About the woman who once lost everything and found something even deeper. They never told the full story. Some pieces were too sacred. But Evelyn always smiled and said, "Boone saved me, and I saved him. The rest, well, the rest is love." The final scene. Back on the porch, as twilight settled over the Montana hills, Evelyn sat with a notebook on her lap. The last page, the last sentence. She wrote, "He came into my life broken and left me whole." Boone lifted his head, as if he knew. And in that golden silence, with the snow melting into promise and the wind carrying tomorrow's scent, Evelyn felt it. Closure. Not the end, but a full circle piece.